Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone who didn't need to prove how smart they were? Because somehow you could just feel it. They didn't dominate the room. They didn't drop facts to impress. They didn't interrupt, overshare, or force their opinions into every conversation. Instead, they just listened, observed, waited, and when they finally spoke, you leaned in, because their words carried weight, not volume, not flash, just quiet certainty. That, my friend, is the kind of intelligence we're talking about today. Welcome to this space where we explore what it really means to live with clarity, strength, and purpose. Today's conversation is one that may challenge how you think about communication, leadership, and even yourself, because here's a truth many men discover, but often too late. Real wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing when to stay silent. It's not how much you say that reveals your intelligence. It's what you choose not to say. Now I know that sounds simple, but in practice, it's one of the hardest things to master. We live in a world that rewards noise. We're told to speak up, stand out, be seen, be heard. But the most respected men I've known, the ones who others naturally trust, follow, and admire, don't lead with volume. They lead with presence. I've spent years studying this, not just through ancient Stoic philosophy, but through real-world observation. Watching body language in boardrooms. Noticing what happens when someone fills silence with insecurity. Seeing how the right pause can command more attention than a well-rehearsed speech. And what I've found over and over is that the wisest men are rarely the loudest in the room. They don't waste words. They don't rush to fill awkward silences. And they never, ever say things that chip away at their credibility or sense of self-respect. Why? Because they've learned through experience, through mistakes, through loss, that words are powerful. And once spoken, some can't be taken back. They've felt the sting of saying something too soon, too harsh, or too thoughtless, and they've chosen to grow from it. They know that ego loves to speak, but wisdom listens. That holding your tongue isn't weakness, it's self-mastery. So in this video, we're diving into 8 phrases intelligent men never say. Not because they're perfect, not because they never feel the urge to react, but because they've lived enough to realize that some phrases do more harm than good, both to themselves and the people around them. These aren't rules, they're refinements. They're signs of a man who is not ruled by impulse, but guided by insight. Now, maybe you're wondering, have I said some of these before? Probably, so have I. This isn't about judgment, it's about growth. Because the real strength of a man isn't in always being right. It's in being willing to learn, adjust, and evolve. So if you're ready to build that kind of quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, stick with me. Because once you recognize these phrases and what they really reveal, you'll start to notice something shift. Not just in how people see you, but in how you see you. And that shift, that's where true silent power begins. Let's get into it. Let's talk about a phrase that seems harmless on the surface, but can quietly sabotage your growth. Already know that. Sounds confident, right? Like you're experienced, capable, on top of things. But here's the truth. When spoken too quickly, it reveals the opposite. It doesn't show strength. It shows a closed mind. I'll never forget the moment I learned this the hard way. Years ago, I was working with a mentor, an older gentleman with the kind of calm, grounded presence that made you listen the moment he opened his mouth. We were reviewing a task I'd done dozens of times before. Routine stuff, I was proud of how well I handled it. He began explaining a small detail I'd overlooked, and without thinking, I cut him off. Yeah, I already know that. He paused, looked at me, not angry, but with a kind of quiet weight that stayed with me. Then he moved on, said nothing more about it. Later that night, it hit me. I hadn't just interrupted him. I had robbed myself of the chance to learn from someone who had lived through battles I hadn't even seen yet. That man had decades of experience. Things no manual could teach, no YouTube video could summarize. And I threw it away with vague, careless words. I already know that. In that moment, I wasn't being smart. I was being defensive. I was protecting my ego, not expanding my mind. And that's what makes this phrase so dangerous. Because what we're really saying is, there's nothing left for me to learn. And as Marcus Aurelius warned, you cannot learn anything when you think you already know everything. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that the greatest obstacle to wisdom isn't ignorance, it's arrogance. The belief that we've arrived, that we've figured it all out, that there's nothing left to gain. But true intelligence? It's humble. It listens fully, especially when the lesson feels familiar. Because real growth doesn't come from hearing something new. It often comes from seeing something old with new eyes. I once watched a master carpenter listen patiently as a young apprentice explained a technique he'd probably mastered 30 years earlier. The old man nodded, asked questions, even thanked him for sharing. Later I asked, why didn't you just tell him you already knew? He smiled and said, because sometimes when you listen to how someone else sees it, you catch something new. That's wisdom. That's leadership. And it doesn't need to announce itself. So the next time you hear something you think you already know, pause, breathe, listen, not because you're humoring someone, but because you might catch a nuance you missed, a new perspective, a deeper insight. And even if you don't, you practice humility, you show respect, and slowly you become someone worth listening to, not because you speak the most, but because you've mastered the rare art of receiving. In Stoicism, we call that mastery of the self. It's the quiet strength to remain a student of life, always, because when you stop learning, you stop growing. So the next time I already know that is about to leave your lips, ask yourself, do I want to sound smart or do I want to become wise? That choice right there is where transformation begins. Let me share a phrase that's quietly killing potential every single day. That's impossible. Now I get it. It sounds practical, maybe even smart. It feels like a way to protect our time, our energy, our expectations. But more often than not, that phrase isn't describing a situation, it's describing a mindset. And behind that mindset isn't logic, it's fear. Several years ago, I worked with someone named Robert. Sharp guy, highly experienced. The kind of leader who looked like he carried the whole company on his shoulders without breaking a sweat. But there was one habit that held him back, again and again. Anytime a new idea came up, whether it was trying a new strategy, entering a new market, or changing an outdated system, Robert's response was always the same. That's impossible. At first, it sounded responsible, realistic, cautious, but over time a pattern emerged. It wasn't the world that was impossible. It was him, his own thinking, his fear of failure, his fear of trying and coming up short. He wasn't analyzing the challenge, he was projecting his doubts onto it. And the Stoics had a name for this. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And that's exactly what was happening here. Robert wasn't being practical. He was being paralyzed by a fear that wore the mask of wisdom. It's easy to do, we tell ourselves. If I can't see the whole path, I shouldn't take the first step. But that's not wisdom. That's hesitation disguised as logic. Years later, I found myself in a similar situation. I was on a project with an impossible budget, an impossible deadline, and a team that honestly felt way too inexperienced. And every bone in my body told me, this can't work. But instead of saying, that's impossible, I asked a better question. What can I control today? And that one shift changed everything. We didn't perform miracles. We just took it one step at a time, one clear decision after another. And slowly, momentum built, confidence grew. The impossible became inevitable. Marcus Aurelius said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. And that mindset, that's what makes the difference. When you say that's impossible, you're declaring defeat before the fight even starts. You're building the wall before testing the door. But the most intelligent men I've met, they don't crumble in front of challenges. They lean in. They don't need the whole staircase to take the first step. They just focus on what's in front of them, what they can move, what they can build, what they can influence right now. And step by step, they become stronger. Because strength isn't just about pushing through easy victories. It's about showing up again and again, especially when the odds feel stacked. So the next time your mind says, that's impossible, I want you to pause and ask, is it truly impossible? Or is it just unfamiliar? Because most of the time, what we label as impossible is simply something we've never dared to attempt. And once you do, you'll realize it wasn't the mountain that needed moving. It was your belief about what was possible all along. Let's talk about one of the most damaging sentences a man can say, especially when things go wrong. That's not my fault. Now I know it's tempting when a project fails, when a relationship falls apart, when something blows up in your face that you didn't directly cause. Saying that's not my fault feels like protecting yourself. But here's what you're really doing when you say that. You're giving away your power. Because every time you push responsibility away, you push away your ability to influence the outcome. You surrender control. You step back from the one thing you could still shape, yourself. I learned this lesson watching a good friend of mine, Michael. He lost a major client. It was a huge deal for his team. And the moment it happened, he went into defense mode. The client was impossible. The market changed. My team dropped the ball. And you know what? All of that was partially true. But while he was busy explaining why it wasn't his fault, he completely missed the opportunity to ask, what could I have done differently? And because of that, he stayed stuck. He repeated the same mistakes in the next project and the one after that. Meanwhile, I've watched other men, just as capable, respond differently. They ask better questions. They don't chase blame. They chase clarity, and that makes all the difference. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus put it simply, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. You see, intelligent men don't pretend they're perfect. They don't take blame for everything, but they do take responsibility, especially when it's hard. Why? Because taking responsibility puts you back in control. It turns you from a passive observer into an active participant in your own life. It might mean saying, I didn't communicate clearly enough. I could have planned better. I should have spoken up sooner. Not to beat yourself up, but to grow, to lead, to earn trust. When you own your part, no matter how small, you do something powerful. You set a standard for yourself and for the people around you. You say, I don't need to be perfect, but I will be accountable. And in a world full of excuses, that kind of ownership stands out. So the next time you feel that urge to say, that's not my fault, pause. Take a breath and ask, what part of this can I take responsibility for? Because blame is easy. Responsibility, that's strength. It's what turns setbacks into lessons and pain into progress. And that's the Stoic path. We're not here to escape difficulty. We're here to rise above it. And rising always starts with one question. What can I do better next time? Let's be honest for a second. One of the most dangerous lies a man can tell himself is this: I don't need help. It sounds noble, strong, independent. It fits perfectly with that old school image of the lone wolf, the self-made man who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders, never complaining, never asking for a hand. But here's the truth most of us aren't taught. Refusing help isn't strength. It's pride, quiet, corrosive, and deeply isolating. And I know that because I've lived it. There was a time in my life when I thought being a man meant holding it all together, no matter what. Work stress, handle it. Family pressure, swallow it. Emotional weight, push through it alone. And for a while I did, until I couldn't anymore. I was burned out, disconnected, angry at myself for struggling, and too ashamed to admit I was overwhelmed. And then one day I cracked. I opened up to someone I trusted. Not with a dramatic confession, just a simple sentence. I can't do this on my own. And you know what I found? Not judgment, not pity, but understanding, support, relief. That one moment of honesty gave me back the energy and clarity I had been missing for years. Because the truth is, strength isn't about doing everything alone. It's about knowing when to reach out and when to accept a hand that's reaching back. History is full of powerful reminders of this. Take Abraham Lincoln, for example, one of the most revered leaders in history. But he didn't rule alone. In fact, he famously filled his cabinet with people who disagree with him, people who challenged his thinking, pushed back, and made him better. He didn't see that as weakness. He saw it as wisdom. Or look at Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, master of Stoic philosophy. In his writings, he humbly thanks his teachers, mentors, and friends for shaping his thoughts and character. If they didn't pretend to have all the answers, why should we? The Stoics believe that we are made for cooperation, not isolation. We are designed to grow with each other, not despite each other, but somewhere along the way, many of us started believing that asking for help meant we had failed, that leaning on someone else was a sign of weakness. And I want to challenge that belief because it's not only false, it's dangerous. It keeps us stuck in silence. It stops us from healing. And worst of all, it denies the people who love us the gift of giving. Asking for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave, because it takes courage to admit you don't have all the answers. And it takes wisdom to know you were never meant to. So the next time you catch yourself thinking, I've got this, I don't need anyone, pause. Ask yourself, is that strength speaking or pride in disguise? Because real strength isn't how long and can carry the weight. It's knowing when to set it down and who to carry it with. Let's talk about a phrase that sounds innocent, but quietly kills purpose and potential. I'm too old for that. Maybe you've said it or thought it. Maybe someone else said it to you and you believe them. But here's the truth. This phrase isn't just a comment about age. It's a quiet form of surrender. It's not about birthdays or gray hair. It's about the moment we stop believing there's still more for us to do, learn, create, and become. And that, my friend, is a lie. Let me tell you a story that proves it. There was a man named Harry Bernstein. For most of his life, Harry was a quiet, hardworking editor. He raised a family, lived through loss, worked behind the scenes. He wasn't famous. He wasn't published. He was, by most definitions, ordinary. But when Harry was 93 years old, something inside him said, "It's not too late." So he sat down and started writing. He wrote about his childhood in a poor English town divided by prejudice. He called the book The Invisible Wall. He poured his memories, regrets, and hope into every page. And at age 96, Harry published his very first book. Not only did it get published, it became an international success, translated into multiple languages, and touched readers around the world. He went on to write 3 more books, all after the age of 96. Now let me ask you, what if Harry had said, "I'm too old for that"? What if he had let the world's expectations or his own doubts convince him that his time had passed? We would have lost his stories. He would have lost his voice. And here's what hits hardest. So many of us do the same thing long before we're 96. We say things like, "I missed my chance. That season of my life is over. It's too late to start over." But the Stoics, men like Marcus Aurelius, reminded us of a deeper truth. Age does not define the soul. The soul doesn't retire. It doesn't stop growing, dreaming, or creating unless we tell it to. I've seen men in their 60s learn new skills, women in their 70s launch businesses, grandparents become mentors, creators, and students all over again. Because wisdom isn't a closing chapter, it's a beginning. Getting older doesn't mean you have nothing left to give. It means you have more to offer because you've lived, you've fallen, you've gotten back up. You've seen the world change and survived it. That's not the end of your value, that's the foundation of it. So if you've been thinking, "I'm too old to change careers, too old to heal that relationship, too old to dream again," please stop. You are not too old. You are ripe. You are seasoned. You are a walking story, and there is still more to write. Purpose doesn't end when youth does. It deepens. And courage? Courage doesn't care what year it is on the calendar. So the next time you catch yourself saying, "I'm too old for that," pause and remember Harry. Remember Marcus. And ask yourself, what if the best chapter of your life hasn't even started yet? Let's talk about a phrase that feels harmless, but might be the most dangerous one of all. "I'll do it later." It sounds reasonable, right? We're busy. Life's chaotic. And telling ourselves we'll handle it later feels like a promise to be responsible, just not right now. But here's the problem. Later is where our best intentions go to die. Every time we say later, we quietly push what matters into the shadows. And often, we never shine a light on it again. Let me tell you a story that still haunts a friend of mine. His father was getting older, slowing down, losing energy. But life was hectic. Work deadlines, travel, family commitments. They had planned a fishing trip, something simple, just a few hours. But he postponed it, said, "We'll go next month," when things calmed down. He kept pushing that trip back. A phone call here, a check-in there, always promising that next time they'd catch up properly. But then one day, his father was gone. No warning, No final conversation, just gone. What was left behind? A phone full of unsent messages and a heart full of things he never got to say. Years later, he told me, I wasn't trying to avoid him. I just thought I had time. But as Marcus Aurelius once wrote, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think. That's not a morbid reminder. It's a call to action because we think we have time until we don't. The Stoics lived with this awareness every day, not out of fear, but out of clarity. They knew that time isn't guaranteed, that later is a luxury we assume we'll have, but often don't. And that's what wise people understand. You don't wait for the perfect moment. You make this moment count. Maybe you've been meaning to say sorry or start that dream project or reconnect with someone you love. And maybe you keep saying, I'll do it when I'm less busy, when I feel more ready, when the timing is right. But the truth, that moment rarely arrives. The stars never fully align. The schedule never magically opens up. The fear never completely disappears. And yet, those who take action anyway, they're the ones who live with fewer regrets. I've seen it in my own life. Letters I didn't write, words I held back, steps I delayed because I thought I had more time. And when I finally stopped waiting and took action, something shifted, the weight lifted, the noise quieted, and I realized it's not intention that shapes your life, it's action. So if there's something you've been putting off, let this be your sign. Later is not a plan. It's a trap, and you are too smart, too capable, and too alive to keep falling for it. So make the call, send the message, take the first messy, imperfect, bold step. Not because you're ready, but because you understand what's truly at stake if you don't. The most intelligent men don't wait for the right time. They create it, and they live today fully because they know that tomorrow is never promised. Let's talk about one of the most limiting beliefs we tell ourselves, often without realizing it. That's just how I am. Sounds harmless, even honest. It feels like self-awareness. But more often than not, it's a quiet way of giving up. We say it when we lose our temper, or when we avoid vulnerability, or when someone challenges us to grow. And instead of doing the work, we shrug and say, that's just how I am. But here's the truth. That phrase doesn't reflect your nature. It reflects your resistance. Because growth is uncomfortable, it forces us to face parts of ourselves we've hidden or protected for years. It demands that we question what we've accepted as normal behavior and ask, is this who I really am or just who I've settled into being? Let me be real with you. I've used this excuse. There was a time when I avoided emotional conversations, always keeping things surface level. When asked why, I'd say, I'm just not a feelings person. But deep down, I wasn't being true to myself. I was being safe. What I called my personality was actually a wall I had built, a wall that protected me from discomfort, but also kept connection out. And that's the danger of that's just how I am. It feels like a boundary, but it's really a barrier. It keeps us from growing, from connecting, from becoming the person we could be. The Stoics saw this clearly. Epictetus said, it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. In the same way, it's not your personality that limits you. It's the story you keep telling about who you are. And if that story never changes, neither do you. Now, this isn't about shame, it's about responsibility. Because intelligent men don't pretend they're finished products. They understand they're still a work in progress. Not because they dislike who they are, but because they respect themselves enough to evolve. Let me ask you something. Are you using "that's just how I am" as a declaration or a defense? Because when you label yourself, you box yourself in. And the longer you live inside that box, the more you start to believe it's all you'll ever be. But what if it's not? What if the truth is that you're capable of more emotional depth, more patience, more discipline, more peace? What if the version of you you're defending is just the outdated draft? Here's the shift. Instead of saying, "that's just how I am," try asking, "what part of me is ready to grow?" Because you're not meant to stay stuck in who you were. You're meant to step into who you're becoming. And every day, every honest reflection, every difficult choice, every act of humility moves you closer. Remember, you're not here to be finished. You're here to be formed. So drop the excuse, pick up the challenge, and keep becoming the man you were meant to be. Let's talk about one of the most misunderstood phrases we hear and say all the time. "I don't care." It sounds bold, detached, like a badge of toughness. And sometimes, yeah, it feels good to say it, to act like nothing gets to you, like you're above it all. But here's the hard truth. Most of the time, "I don't care" doesn't mean strength. It means exhaustion. It means fear. It means someone once cared too much and got hurt. So now they build a wall. They numb themselves. They wear apathy like armor. And I get it. I've been there. There was a time in my life when everything felt overwhelming, too many emotions, too many disappointments. So I shut down. If someone asked how I felt, I'd just say, "I don't care." About the news, about relationships, about my own dreams. But deep down, I did care. I just didn't want to admit it. Because to care is to risk. To care is to be vulnerable. And vulnerability, that's terrifying when you're tired or when the world hasn't been kind to you. But here's the shift. Apathy is not power. Selective attention is. The Stoics didn't teach us to be indifferent to everything. In fact, Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You were made not to ignore the world, but to engage with it wisely." You see, indifference isn't wisdom. Wisdom is knowing what matters and giving it your full energy, your heart, your presence. Smart men don't say, "I don't care" to everything. They say, "I care deeply about the right things," and they protect that energy with intention. So let me ask you, when you say "I don't care," is it true, or are you just trying not to feel disappointed again? Because behind that phrase, there is usually something tender, something that does matter to you, whether it's respect, connection, peace, or purpose. And by pretending not to care, you don't protect yourself. You cut yourself off from the things that give life color and meaning. Caring isn't weakness, it's courage. But it takes strength to admit what really matters. It takes wisdom to let go of what doesn't. And it takes emotional discipline to stay soft in a world that tells you to harden up. So the next time you catch yourself about to say, "I don't care," pause. Ask yourself, what am I actually feeling? And is there something here worth facing, even if it's uncomfortable? Because real strength isn't about feeling nothing. It's about feeling everything and still choosing to stand tall. You weren't made to be numb. You were made to feel, to grow, to connect, and to care boldly, wisely, and without apology. That's not weakness. That's emotional mastery. And that's what the most intelligent men are quietly building every single day. So here's where we land. Wisdom doesn't come from being flawless. It doesn't come from knowing all the answers or having the perfect mindset every day. No, real wisdom begins the moment you notice the quiet, limiting thoughts that are holding you back and choose not to let them define you anymore. Because each of the phrases we've explored, I know already, that's impossible. It's not my fault. I don't need help. I'm too old. I'll do it later. That's just how I am. I don't care. None of them make you weak. They just make you human. You see, saying those things doesn't mean you failed. It simply means you're ready to grow. And growth doesn't begin with pride. It begins with humility, the quiet kind. The kind that says, I've still got work to do, and I'm willing to do it. The Stoics taught us that self-mastery isn't about looking strong. It's about becoming strong from the inside out. Not by force, but by reflection. Not by pretending, but by practicing. So if you saw yourself in any of these phrases today, if you've ever caught yourself making excuse, hiding behind labels, or pushing away your potential, that's not a flaw, that's a signal. It's a sign that you're awake, aware, and ready to move forward, because the most intelligent men aren't the ones who never stumble. They're the ones who learn from every step. They're the ones who pause before they speak, reflect before they react, and rise again, not by accident, but by intention. And you can be one of them. You don't need to change everything overnight. Just start with one small choice, one shift in how you speak to yourself, one moment where you pause and choose power over pride. That's how inner strength is built. That's how self-respect is earned, not through perfection, but through persistence. So if this video stirred something in you, if even one phrase made you think differently, then don't let that moment pass. Take it with you. Use it. Let it shape the way you lead, love, and live. And if you're ready for more lessons like this, more tools to sharpen your thinking and strengthen your presence, then do one thing, hit subscribe, because this is only the beginning. Each week we dive deeper, not into trends, not into noise, but into timeless principles that help you become the kind of man who doesn't have to raise his voice, because his presence already speaks volumes. Thank you for being here. Now go, live wisely, speak mindfully, and grow intentionally. We'll see you in the next one.